Hello. We'd like to welcome you to our session on developing inquiry-based schools and school libraries. Barbara Stripling, Daryl, and Jenny Tureen. The first thing that we wanted to confront is, well, our session is on inquiry. What is the promise of inquiry? Why do we consider it to be so important? And it's because we know that inquiry is involved with engaging and empowering learners for life. They're going to develop the skills and attitudes to have an inquiry stance that lasts them for a lifetime. They're going to be able to learn on their own and have a focus on making their own decisions and constructing their own understandings. And most importantly, and what we're going to focus on today, is that our learners are going to develop the durable skills, the kinds of skills that involve not only academic, but also social, emotional, and cultural competencies. And those are the skills that they need to last them for a lifetime.
In order to keep the promise of inquiry, we need to keep the following principles clearly in mind. Inquiry is an iterative learning process that originates in and terminates in the inquirer. This makes the focus of our attention the inquirer and not the inquiry process, although a concern with the process is essential. For inquiry to actually be a learning process, it must be undertaken in a spirit of wonder and puzzlement. Awakening, or more likely reawakening, this spirit is our first and foremost task if inquiry is not to be a dull and mechanical procedure. As a learning process, inquiry proceeds logically through distinct stages that are undergirded by a continuum of skills, more on this later, that need to be developed systematically and progressively if inquiry is not to be a meaningless, chaotic activity. As a learning process within school, inquiry must largely be directed towards learning important disciplinary content in an interdisciplinary way if inquiry is not to be a trivial waste of time. Fossil is an instructional model of the inquiry process that I adapted in 2011 from Barbara's work as reflected in the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, all of which is freely available under Creative Commons. My work on Fossil led to the formation of the Fossil Group in 2019, which is a community of inquiry centered on Fossil and the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, which then led to a personal and ongoing collaboration with Barbara in 2020.
We did base it on my original model of inquiry, and I'll just point out that we consider inquiry to be iterative, and you can see the arrows going both ways, but we know that kids need to be able to connect in a precise way, an individual way, and then they need the freedom to ask the questions and wonder. Investigate, obviously, we want them to find answers to the questions, and often that produces more questions, which is part of the iteration there. My favorite aspect of inquiry is construct, because to me, it only matters if kids are empowered to construct their own understandings, to form their own opinions, and to proceed to find evidence to support those opinions. And then certainly being able to express those ideas and then to reflect on their own learning. So again, as Daryl said, this is freely available, and there's the URL. What we wanted to talk about next, though, is how we built on this idea of inquiry to fulfill it through a whole child, a much broader perspective, recognizing that students don't just need to develop academically, but they need to develop socially and emotionally and culturally. And so what we have developed are portraits of engaged and empowered learners. And you can see the attributes there of the competencies for a 12th grade learner. So let's dig into those a little more deeply. You can see from this chart, the portrait characteristics are along the top. Certainly, students need an independent learning ability. There are lots of skills embedded in independent learning, and certainly including inquiry, including literacy, use of technology. These are the pieces of the academic learning that are most important if students are going to learn on their own in any way. But also important is that students develop an identity of themselves. They know who they are. They know where they come from. They know their own strengths, and they can build from those strengths. Social and emotional learning, we know, is essential, and more schools and teachers are understanding that building those into the learning actually helps students to grow in dramatic ways, not just academically. Cultural responsiveness, note that this is not just cultural awareness, it's responsiveness. It's students being able to understand other cultures and be empathetic and to look for different perspectives and recognize their own perspective and then respect other perspectives. Personally, I think voice and agency are highly undersold in our schools. We need to empower our kids to find their voice and then to have the self-confidence to proclaim that to others. And finally, certainly a growth mindset is important. We want our students prepared to be learners for life. Note that we have portraits at grade 2, 5, 8, and 12. So here's an example of the vertical. That's fine. Go ahead and move forward. This is an example of the vertical alignment for independent learning. Because these have to be developed over the years of schooling, we can't expect 12th graders to come out fully developed if they haven't had any experiences in grade 2, 5, 8, and 12. And so the 4 portraits for independent learning, second graders need to be able to set goals for their own learning and use resources to find facts and understand the difference between fact and opinion. And you can see there are embedded skills in there, and we're going to talk about that. By the time they're in grade 12, we hope they have actually developed an inquiry stance and that they make a choice often to pursue new ideas and questions, and they're willing to follow their own sense of wonder and then use critical thinking and creative thinking to construct their own understandings and to share them with others. We also have an alignment, well, for all of those attributes, but here's another example, the social and emotional competencies. At grade 2, we want them to be able to take action on how they feel about things and help build the community by paying attention to their own feelings and the feelings of others. By grade 8, we expect students to build trusting relationships with diverse peers and adults. And you know how important that is for middle school. That is really an area of emphasis that we need to place in our teaching. Collaboration becomes essential, and communicating beyond maybe even just their classroom and their peers. By grade 12, I hope every student, every learner is empathetic and able to retrain healthy and mature relationships with peers and community. There's also a horizontal alignment, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in terms of our teaching and our constructing inquiry units. Notice at grade 2, we can follow along and see how at grade 2, we could include competencies from a number of these different attribute areas in one teaching experience. So if we're reading a story to kids at grade 2, we can help students not only understand what's happening in the story, comprehend, but also understand how they relate to the story. What are their own strengths and how do those compare to other characters in the story? We can help them value the uniqueness of each character in the story and of themselves, and share their ideas with their classmates and have a discussion. Hopefully every grade 2 student develops the idea that I'm in charge of myself, and how wonderful if we build that into every single learning experience. At grade 12, you can see we've also aligned the portrait attributes, and you can look at the portraits online to have more time to actually read these, but we're expecting 12th graders to be empathetic, to respect themselves, to seek multiple perspectives, and to challenge when material that they read is biased or based on power or privilege. We want them actually to pay attention to the source of what they're gathering, whether online or in print, and then figure out what is true, what matters, who's speaking, what is their perspective, and form their own opinions and be willing to speak their mind and take action and collaborate with others. It's a beautiful portrait of a learner who has developed competencies that will stand them in good stead as citizens in the world. Now, we can't just end with the competencies because you don't teach a whole competency. So what we need to think about is how to translate those competencies to the actual embedded skills. And so we wanted to give you a URL for the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, because it's a whole continuum of skills that you can select from and mix and match and figure out what are the skills that you want to teach in your own learning experiences and as you're constructing inquiry units. Now, I'll just give you one example of how you translate the competencies for 5th grade. I engage in difficult conversations, respect cultural differences, and seek diverse opinions. That's the competency. So what do you have to do to help kids develop that competency by 5th grade? Well, in 3rd grade, you can teach them to contribute to group discussions, to form their own opinion and have evidence to back it up, to have conversations with peers where they listen to others and are willing to share their own opinion. 4th graders, you get a little more sophisticated in the skills that you teach, and you now want them to be able to compare 2 points of view and gather the evidence for each point of view. You want them to be able to listen with an open mind and change their mind if it's appropriate. By 5th grade, we want them to start developing empathy, to not only understand what others are saying, but why, and why that matters to them, to respect the perspectives of others, and then to be willing to exchange ideas about some of the thorny issues that they're going to confront, but always with a respectful attitude difficult conversations are fine if our students are prepared to engage respectfully, to gather their own evidence, and be willing to share their own opinions.
So having talked about the sort of more general, higher level view of these skills and competencies, we wanted to make it really practical by looking at particular inquiry units and how they relate to a particular inquiry unit. So this is a unit on volcanoes. It was that I did with a grade 4 teacher this term. And Barbara kindly put together this matrix with all of the different stages in the inquiry process down the left-hand side that we would expect them to step through during that unit, and those portrait attributes along the top. So we don't have time to focus on the whole matrix now, but we're going to look at the investigate row. So in this investigate row, you can see Bob's chosen 4 particular attributes there, and we've got the idea of assessing the accuracy of prior assumptions, developing new understandings, particularly relating to volcanoes, for our self-identity. In the social and emotional attributes, they're empathizing with people who have been affected and who live near the volcanoes. And in cultural responsiveness, we're wanting to think about different groups of people who live near different volcanoes and how that impacts on their lives differently. And that might depend on all sorts of things. It might depend on their socioeconomic level. It might depend on their culture, their family life, what their family does for a living, all sorts of things. So the first one in that row that I skipped over is the one that most of us as school librarians feel very confident with, and that is part of our core responsibility in terms of teaching, is evaluating and selecting books and websites that are appropriate to the level of the student who's reading them. And actually, for this inquiry, it became probably the most difficult thing to try to embed for the students. So this is a graphic organizer that I developed for those students when they were working through this inquiry, and it looked at things like tourism and farming, the stories that people had around their volcanoes. And I started trying to find resources, putting myself in their place and pretending to see what it was like for them to try and find resources. And it was really, really hard, because if you look at the kind of normal resources that we might choose for an inquiry like this, something like Britannica, there were some lovely articles, but they were very factual, and they were very much saying this volcano erupted at this point, and this number of people needed to move, and this is how tall it is. And they didn't answer those kind of questions that we needed. So I had to look quite a bit further afield, and I found some really interesting articles like this one about trout farming and a volcano in Mexico, but they were written at too high a level for these students. So it quickly became very apparent that they were not going to be able to access these. They weren't going to be able to find these articles for themselves. So I had to curate a set of lots of different articles they could use. And actually the grade 4 teacher took some of those articles and used AI to bring them down to a reading level that grade 4 could cope with. So it was quite a complex experience, and it meant that we couldn't actually develop that particular competency in this unit. We did something else instead. We looked at using the information, but we knew that we then had to develop that elsewhere in the year. So it's really important that we knew that that wasn't something we developed strongly during this unit. So what we wanted to do was give you a very quick whistle-stop tour overview of 3 more signature work inquiries that we run across the school. The idea of our signature work inquiries is that it's something that the students do over quite a long period of time, and it's something that runs across a range of different subjects, and it allows us to build these key skills and competencies with the whole year group at once, so that they can then be used in other subjects. So this first one with a kindergarten teacher was just looking at the idea of our beautiful island of Guernsey and why we'd want to visit it. They could take them out to lots of different destinations. They got to make artworks, they cooked some local food, they did surveys, they drew graphs, and at the end of it, they put on an exhibition that all the parents were invited to, but also our local tourist board, which was really exciting for them. And as part of their maths, they sold tickets to that exhibition as well. And it gave them a real sense of pride and ownership in the topic. But it also developed, obviously, the awe and wonder there, but very importantly, important key inquiry competencies. And it also was developing that key subject knowledge that they needed across a range of different subjects. In grade 5, the library is the backbone, it's the spine. We run a signature work inquiry that encompasses English, art, science, maths, and ICT. And we're also looking at including some theology or religious studies in there as well next year. And this one is based in UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it starts with a very practical science inquiry with lots of practical experimentation. They use the outcome of that to make something in art. They make a water bottle cover, and then they come out of that to broaden out into a campaign that they run across the whole school and possibly beyond. And they come out of this with a national UK award that's usually only awarded in grade 6. So they feel very proud of what they've achieved. And then finally here in grade 8, we run an inquiry which is based in their English, but it also has aspects of ICT. And this one leads to a qualification, a GCSE qualification as part of their English GCSE, which is for some students is a school leaving qualification, because you can leave school at age 16 in the UK. And this one is really aimed at them exploring a topic that they are very passionate about, that's focused on a UN Sustainable Development Goal. We have a digital literacy course that goes with it, and there's a huge focus on reading for learning, and that's something which they can use across all their different subjects as they move out of this, and it leads on to the higher project qualification for some. And I think the really important thing with inquiries like this is that they are vital opportunities to develop communities across a whole year group, to develop the language that we need, that we're describing inquiry in the same way across different subjects. We're working with lots of different teachers, and it develops that community that is speaking the same language and is doing the same thing across the whole school, which allows us to develop that further and much more deeply and much more richly.
In conclusion, we'd like to leave you with 2 thoughts. The first one is that the curriculum is not just a body of knowledge, but it's actually groups of communities that we need to encourage our students to join and become active members of. And that takes us back to the first principle that we need to bear in mind. Our first and foremost task is to awaken or reawaken a sense of wonder and puzzlement in our students if learning is to happen. And then secondly, classrooms are full of unique individuals, unique inquirers, and that includes the teacher. It's not just every student who is an inquirer. The teacher needs to be an inquirer as well. And if we view ourselves and the communities, the different communities that we are engaged in at school as communities of inquiry, then we position ourselves to equip our students to take hold of and to take full advantage of the opportunities that their futures hold for them. We're very thankful for your time and attention, and we invite you to join us on our journey and hope that you might reach out to us and share something of your journey with us too. Thank you, and farewell.
Thank you.